back. This is Darreck Kirby from the Dallas Prospect, back to give you a little bit of Mavericks news because, hey, the NBA season is coming back. Scrimmages begin today. The Mavericks play tomorrow against the Lakers. I believe that will be on NBA TV. We're going to start out with some scrimmages, then we're going to get into 8 games for the remainder of a regular season, and then from there we will have ourselves a unique playoff format. I wanted to actually go through 5 impactful Mavericks to watch during the remainder of this season because this is a unique situation. This is different from any NBA season ever, and the Mavericks find themselves in a unique position that while they are considered right now the 7th seed based on where the season ended before, they could be a team that goes a little under the radar and makes some real noise. Now, I'll be upfront with you right off the bat. I'm not going to list Luka Doncic or Kristaps Porzingis on this list because, frankly, those two are a little bit obvious, right? Luka, 21 years old, sophomore season, already an MVP candidate. That right there tells you more than enough. Of course he's going to be a player with a significant impact on how far the Mavericks go this year. Kristaps Porzingis, likewise, 25 years old, unicorn, elite rim protector, and how he's played since the start of January after the Dwight Powell Achilles injury. Of course that's a significant impact. We're not going to talk about those guys on this list because that's too on the nose. We're instead going to focus on 5 Mavericks that will have a decided impact on how far Dallas goes this season. First on deck, we've got Seth Curry. Now, if you have a subscription to The Athletic, I highly recommend Saad Yusef's article on Seth Curry's tremendous three-point shooting. I'm just going to touch on this a little bit here, and I'm going to, of course, cite and credit Saad with a lot of this stuff here. But I still encourage you, regardless, to get a more full, complete picture of Curry's impact this season. I encourage you to go read Saad's article if you have a subscription. If not, I'll give you some of the highlights here. In his first season back with the Mavericks, Seth Curry has had himself a career year. He's averaging 12.6 points, which is just behind his 2016 campaign with the Mavericks, wherein he averaged 12.8. The difference here is that this is a vastly better Mavericks offense and team in general than it was in 2016 when he was here previously, and his role has really grown. Now, through the first portion of the year, he was not blowing people away. Through 38 games, he was shooting 38.5%, as Saad Yusef points out in his article. The transformation for Curry really settled in as he kind of adapted to his new role within this offense. This offense is vastly different from what it was in 2016, night and day, as Curry himself points out. Said Curry of his adjustment after the first 38 games, you just have to find them within the offense, them being the shots. It's a little more random, a little more just make plays, pick and roll, spread offense, and high-paced. This is vastly different from the 2016 Mavericks he played with, where things were a little bit more structured. Things were designed for certain guys to get shots on certain possessions. Now it's more flow and a little bit, as he said, more random. Now that 54% mark he's at the last 21 games, where that ranks over the course of a season, is the highest mark by far in the NBA. Of players, as Saad points out, who've shot at least 100 threes this season, the next closest would be Miami's Duncan Robinson with 46.3%. Curry is on fire, or rather he was before the season reached a suspension point on March 11th. Now, it is a little bit presumptuous to assume that a guy would come back from months of inaction and immediately step right back into the role. But if Curry's evolution really did come from the fact that he was not just on a hot streak, but rather had fully adapted to and mastered his role within the offense, it's not crazy to think that he's going to continue shooting at a rather good pace. I mean, you look at the guy's career, he is the career active leader in three-point percentage. that translates well because he already knows and understands his role and the flow of the offense and things like that. He's got an elite point guard now in Luka Doncic to find him and get him the ball. He has guys like Kristaps Porzingis who have a certain gravitas about them, kind of like Dirk Nowitzki before him, that draw defenses in and free you up on the perimeter. You can make a substantial impact doing that kind of thing. So while the marksmanship might not be there at like 54%, it's certainly reasonable to suggest that the rest of the way, he'll probably be one of the biggest X factors on this team. And that's something that I talked about throughout the season, saying I felt like he could be one of the biggest X factors on this Mavericks team. And through the first 38 games, that looked a little bit foolish, but I think we saw over the last month or so of the season, that's really not so far out of the realm of possibility. For more in-depth analysis of Curry's specific impact, whether you're talking about within the flow of the offense, definitely check out Saad's article on The Athletic. Another big impact player for the Mavericks is going to be Maxi Kleber, because Maxi finds himself in a unique situation. Now, he is shooting a career-best 37.4% from beyond the three-point line. He is averaging a career-best 9.2 points and 1.2 blocks per game. That's great. He's a great rim protector, and he can stretch the floor a little bit. He's not a great rebounder. He's averaging 5.4 boards this year, but he's going to have added importance now because obviously, Dwight Powell is out for the year. He's not playing. He's coming back from the Achilles. You're not going to see him until next season. Things then got more complicated for the Mavericks because you had Willie Cauley-Stein decline to participate in the renewal of the NBA season because he's expecting a newborn. And yeah, hard to argue with a guy trying to protect his family and not taking any risk. However, that leaves the Mavericks in a unique and bit of an awkward situation because now, without Willie Cauley-Stein and without Dwight Powell, you find yourself with Kristaps Porzingis, Boban Marjanovic, and Maxi Kleber pretty much rounding out your center position. Now, Dallas had an opportunity when Willie Cauley-Stein declined to go out and use that open roster spot then that they had to go get themselves another significant front court player, but they didn't. Instead, they opted to bring back former Maverick point guard from last season, also a former New York Knick as part of that KP trade, Trey Burke. Now, Trey Burke is a nice player, but it's hard to specify what impact he might have for this team because Luka is your point guard. You also have JJ Barea, who I expect to, get some minutes here and there and have an opportunity. So it's hard to quantify if it would have been better to get a front court player, but the Mavericks ultimately felt like that was the better play for them at that time. What that leaves is a bit of a narrow lane at your center position because Boban, as impactful as he is when he's on the court, has never throughout his career gotten heavy minutes. So in a sense, your three guys is kind of like 2.5 guys in terms of availability. And then KP, until the Dwight Powell injury this year, never really played center, especially not effectively. He was best as a power forward despite being 7'3", and now he finds himself in this position where it's like, hey, after Powell went down with the injury, yes, he has excelled. His best basketball as a Maverick has come during the time he's been playing center. That's great, but it still leaves you shallow on depth there. So as such, you're going to have to see Dallas get a little bit creative with what they want to do. Now, again, Maxi having a career best year, that's great, but he's going to have to give Dallas better production than even his career best numbers probably. I'm not saying he has to score 10 plus points a game, but he's going to have to rebound better and he's going to have to continue to protect the rim. And while he is shooting 37% from beyond the arc this year, he went on a bit of a slump there before the season suspended, and he's going to have to step that back up. Career best number or not, he's going to have to push that number back up 39, 40% if he can. And if he can do that, if he can continue to stretch the floor and protect the rim without getting in too much foul trouble, then you have yourself a real opportunity to make a significant impact on this team that is really in a bit of a bind with regard to the center position. Next, we have Tim Hardaway Jr., who struggled mightily at the start of the season in his first full year in Dallas, but really eventually settled into the flow of the offense and emerged kind of as Dallas's number 3 option. Now, there's been a lot of speculation, and it's always a fun thing, whether you're looking at Bleacher Report or Clutch Points or wherever, ESPN, everyone always talks about Dallas potentially adding a 3rd star. Who is it going to be? How are they going to acquire that player? That's a discussion for later, but from a pure production standpoint, Tim Hardaway Jr. has largely filled that role well for Dallas this year, providing Rick Carlisle's offense an absolute flamethrower. Hardaway is shooting 40.7% from beyond the arc this season, averaging 15.8 points per game. That's a slight step up from where he was last year in terms of his points per game with Dallas, but the big improvement is obviously the 3-point shooting. We're talking about a guy who's usually around 33-34%, jumping up 6 full points in his percentage. Now, a lot of that has to do with the gravitas, as I mentioned earlier, of Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis opening things up for him, but it's also just having the big cojones to take that shot and be fearless. Tim Hardaway Jr. has done that, and he has excelled. You also then take into consideration the fact that he is a guy who is coming into a potentially free agent summer. He's got an option left on his contract, a player option, worth about $20 million approximately. And as such, that means he could just opt into next year and play out as is. I expect, because of the goodwill he's built up over the course of this year and Mark Cuban's stated desire to bring him back next season, I would go as far as to say he probably opts out and gets himself a little bit more big money and long-term security so he doesn't have to try and do another prove-it year when he's already done so well now. As such, it's very reasonable to expect a hot stretch over these 8 games, and then especially in the postseason, will do wonders for him improving the value of his contract. And because of his fit within this team, I really expect Dallas to bring him back. And I think Cuban is going to be likely to try and reward him, especially with some of the shakiness now coming up with the cap next year and how it's been impacted by, obviously, how much money the league lost due to the COVID-19 pandemic. So as such, if Dallas doesn't have the kind of money to go get a big name like they want anyway, they might just repurpose some of that money on really taking care of their guys at home. And I could see Hardaway very much benefiting from such a stretch. So, with that in mind, you're talking about a guy whose effective field goal percentage is 55.4% this season, shooting a career best almost 41% from 3 on over 7 attempts per game, going in now to a playoff run for the first time in his career, or did he make it once with Atlanta? I digress. You're talking about a guy with a chance to make a significant impact on a platform he's not had before, going into a big money summer for him potentially. I expect him to step up to the challenge and have a major role for the Mavericks. Next up, we have JJ Barea, who might seem like a little bit of a curious addition on this list, given he's 35 years old and coming off an Achilles injury of his own. He plays 15 minutes a night. So you might look at that and think like, I don't know about that. But consider this. JJ Barea this season, even though he's only appeared in 26 games, he's getting 6.9 shot attempts per game. That's in 15 minutes a night. He's also dishing out 3.8 assists. This dude is instant offense off the bench. He is a spark plug that has routinely throughout the season gotten the Mavericks out of an offensive slump and gotten them back into games. He can score in bunches, and he can still weave through a defense, find open shooters, and get to the cup on his own as well. Now, obviously, he's not the player he was before. His past couple years with Dallas were frankly incredibly underrated, but he's still very much able to bring a little bit of that impact to the team in terms of threading his way through the defense and creating offense for himself and others. Now, what's interesting about this as well is he's one of the only guys on this team with real playoff experience. And obviously he's got championship experience being part of that 2011 championship team. In fact, the X factor of that championship team. with him in the starting lineup, the Mavericks never lost a game in the finals in 2011. So, with that in mind, you look at this and you say, okay, we got a guy who's shooting 38% from three, a guy who's been instant offense, again, 7 shots basically in 15 minutes a night, plus 4 assists. The dude takes over when he gets into the game. Because the Mavericks have played him so little, and he's had now extra time, a couple extra months to really round himself physically back into form after tearing his Achilles, I tend to think that the Mavericks have saved him up all this time for what was initially going to be a, hey, here's a late season and playoff push. Now here we are, and it's like, okay, we're in the postseason. You've gotten extra time. We're basically trying to cash in your value now. We're going to try and get anything you can give to this team now. I expect JJ Barea, as such, to basically be not a featured part of the offense by any point, but I expect him to be a very impactful player for Dallas off the bench and really getting things going. He also opens things up a little bit where when he and Luka are in the game together at the same time, Luka has a little bit more freedom to then play off the ball. Now we know how good Luka is on the ball, but that'll open things up a little bit for him as well. Trey Burke, as I mentioned earlier, being added, brings in a little bit more of a logjam there, but I still think Trey Burke coming into the fold so late at this point, I think he'll get minutes here and there, but I think obviously Barea is the main guy that Dallas would rather run with. Plus him and Burke's styles of play don't mesh. It's not like it's redundant or anything like that. So yes, JJ Barea should factor pretty heavily into any kind of postseason run the Mavericks make, despite his age and despite the pretty small sample size we've seen of him throughout the year thus far. Finally, we have a little bit of a twist here. And number 1 on this list, we have not a player. We have Mavericks coach Rick Carlisle. Now, Rick Carlisle doesn't get the love from the fan base that he should. And in fact, in a lot of cases, you have a vocal subsect of the Mavericks fan base who actually don't like Carlisle and want him fired. This is a bit ridiculous if you look at the full body of work and what he's had to work with in a lot of those years. But all the same, this is a guy who not only has won you a championship, brilliantly coaching in the NBA Finals, but his best work probably came in the 2014 playoffs. Let me explain. In that series, the 8-seeded Mavericks pushed the eventual champion San Antonio Spurs to 7 games. Now, yes, they eventually ran out of gas and they got blown out in Game 7. But you're nevertheless talking about a team that featured Samuel Dallenberg as a starter, pushing the Spurs' big 3 plus an emerging eventual finals MVP that season, Kawhi Leonard, to 7 games. It is maddening how that team was able to push the Spurs to the brink. They came perilously close to we believing the Spurs. Now, how did they do it? They obviously didn't have the same kind of firepower. Yeah, you had Dirk, who was still balling. Yeah, you had Monte Ellis in his first year with Dallas, and he was balling. You had Vince Carter still providing a lot of great moments. Obviously, people remember his Game 3 three-point buzzer beater to take a 2-1 lead in the series over the Spurs. That's probably the most iconic shot of Vince Carter's career, and it's an incredible moment, but people remember that better than they remember Rick Carlisle's coaching job. The Mavericks, yeah, they were an efficient offense that year. They were 9th offensively. It was a 49-win Maverick team, 9th rated offense, a little bit thin in terms of what kind of depth they had in terms of their interior defense, and as such, Rick Carlisle had to get creative. You had to not only blitz the Spurs offensively, you not only had to work with pace, but you had to then pair with that some creative defensive looks, let's say. You had to run Sean Marion basically anywhere you could, including on Tim Duncan for stretches, to try and make up for that, weakness that was being exploited again and again and again. And you had Dwan Blair as your other big man down low. And now Dwan Blair, let's just say, is burly and not really a big body in terms of stature that you could put down there in that situation. But the Mavericks nevertheless pitched a beautiful game, basically had to get as creative as humanly possible. And it wasn't because of coaching. Even though they were going up against Greg Popovich, had nothing to do with coaching where the Spurs just figured them out. The Spurs just eventually had the talent that they were able to just power through. The Mavericks were not a particularly young team, and the Spurs had superior talent that eventually just broke through. Now compare that to today. The Mavericks have the number 1 rated offense in the league. If you go between the gap between the Mavericks as the number 1 rated offense and the number 2 rated offense, which I think is the Rockets, the gap between 1 and 2 there is greater than the gap between number 2 and number 15 in terms of offensive efficiency in the league this year. It is crazy how good the Mavericks have been. And even though they were the 7 seed, you consider, as I said earlier, a 21-year-old MVP candidate, Luka Doncic, a 25-year-old unicorn and elite rim protector in Kristaps Porzingis, and Tim Hardaway Jr. having not a career year in terms of points per game, but certainly in terms of his efficiency and points per game, how that all balances out. You have all these guys stepping up their game. You have a plethora of shooters. Several guys this year have elevated their three-point shooting, and that's a testament to Carlisle and the Mavericks shooting coaches. Maxi Kleber, career best shooting year, 37% right now. Dorian Finney-Smith having a career best shooting year, vastly improving on that front. We're talking about a guy who was last year his best mark for his career was 30% from beyond the arc. Now I think he's around 37%. Significant improvement there. Those corner threes are very, very generous to him. And then you got Tim Hardaway Jr. stepping up his three-point percentage. You have Seth Curry coming in and being just a flamethrower of his own right in terms of efficiency. Yeah, his attempts per game can be a little bit up and down, as he mentioned in his quote with Saad Yusef in his article. But nevertheless, you're talking about a team with a lot of shooters, with 2 elite players, and a coach who suddenly has a young, fast, run-and-gun team that can make some things happen. Because of the lack of center depth for the team right now, he's already going to have to be a little more creative. But now he's been given all this extra time, fresh players, and time to strategize around it. This is uncharted territory, what's available to Carlisle here. And because of everything we've seen in the past from him, and now the weapons at his disposal, I tend to think there aren't many better coaches you could put in this situation. And as such, I think it's hard to make an argument that anybody outside of the obvious that I mentioned earlier, Luka and KP and their play themselves, I think it's hard to make an argument that there is any one player or coach in a more impactful position for the Mavericks the rest of the way than Rick Carlisle. Because with the season set up the way it is, the Mavericks have a chance to fly under the radar for a little bit and then make some serious noise. Because if you take out the games that Luka missed, that KP missed, they both had stretches where they missed 6 to 10 games. You take those out and you look at what the team looks like. This is a team that was, prior to the injuries, the 2 seed in the West. The logjam between 2 and 7 is incredibly tight. Closer than the 2 to 7 is closer in the West than 7 to 9 was. The Mavericks aren't that far off, is what I'm saying. They're 13 games over 500, the most efficient offense in the league, and they're getting better. If you add in health and an elite coach in unique circumstances, you have an opportunity to make noise and to make a deep playoff run. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. These are 5 players, or in the case of Carlisle, a coach, who I believe can make a significant impact to the remainder of the season. Don't forget to drop a like, leave a comment below as I mentioned before, subscribe to the Dallas Prospect, and remember, every legend was once a prospect.